I'm joined here by Steve Fenton, who's a member of our team here at Octopus. And Steve has written a great article that is up on our blog right now. You can check it out, available up on octopus.com/blog. It's entitled Creating a High Performance DevOps Toolchain. Hi, Steve. Thanks for writing this. It's basically a summary of what is called the State of Continuous Delivery Report, which is a report that's been written by Slashdata and been also republished by the CD Foundation. So tell us a little bit about the report.
Yeah, so the report was launched last week at CDCon, and it's a little look into who's using continuous delivery in DevOps and the kind of tools they're using and what works and what maybe doesn't work.
Right. And they've been doing this report for a few years, haven't they?
They have, I think this is the fourth year that they've been doing the report.
There you go. And these reports are basically the state of how folks are delivering software. So thus the state of CD, and it gives you a perspective on what folks are doing, and it basically provides a series of answers to questions that were asked by the folks at Slashdot. You wrote this blog post, as I said it earlier, and you summarized some of the findings there. What were some of the interesting things that you found in the report that caught your attention?
So one of the interesting things that I found in the report is that it really focuses in on the DevOps toolchain, and not a lot of other reports talk about it because they're kind of talking about all the kind of practices and techniques that you might use.
The boring stuff. Yeah, no one cares
Yeah,
about
that's
practices.
right.
Give me the
Yeah,
tools. That's what
everyone,
I want.
everyone's like, yeah, it's great, it's academic. In this case, it's like specifically, are you using tools in each of these 17 areas that they've got, and how many tools should you be using? Because obviously, whenever you're bringing tools in, you start worrying about how many tools you've got, how they're going to work together, and quite often, if you make the wrong choices, the tools get in your way, and they stop helping you. And I think that's what's interesting about the report is we can look in and say, what's the correct number of tools I should be using, and like how would it affect my performance?
Yeah, this one that I've highlighted here was kind of a like, wow, I didn't know that. So you had cited here that almost 45% of low performance used a single tool and deployed less frequency than once a month. And then the high performers were the folks who were two times more likely to be using 10 plus more or 10 or greater tools than a single tool. So teams that were significantly less likely to be low performers were used if they use CI/CD tools to automate builds and deployments. So I was like, wow, more tools means a higher performing team.
Absolutely, and it's kind of counterintuitive because I think if you asked people how many tools would be the right number, they probably would be looking for a small number. But it turns out that that actually inhibits your performance. You don't do as well if you're trying to do it without the support of tools. I suppose the reasons for low numbers of tools are either you've got gaps where you haven't actually brought a tool in to do a job, and I think CI/CD is one of those areas where if you try and do it without some cool tools in the space there, it's actually quite hard work. And then the tools just make it super easy. And the other reason might be that you've kind of opted for something quite general to try and solve many of the problems, but actually it doesn't perform well against some of the areas that are critical. So I think those are the two reasons you might not have enough tools.
That makes sense to me. Like if you consider CI/CD as like a pipeline, and we talk about shift left and pipelines and all this sort of stuff, choosing the best in class tools, which is something you highlight here, obviously makes for a better overall pipeline, I would imagine. So, make sure your workloads are using best in class tools, I guess. Duh. That's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, I suppose if you think about your build server, if it can't like do all the things you need, like security scanning and running your tests and all of those other tasks that you want, you don't want it to just kind of build an exe, at the end of the process. You want it to do a whole bunch of other things now that make your software more secure and more reliable. So if you've got a tool that doesn't fulfill all of that, actually your performance will be lower. Even though you've ticked that box, we've got something that can run a build and give us an artifact at the end of it. That's not sufficient anymore. So you need something that's keeping up with all of that shift left on security and all of those additional tasks that you need.
Prefer managed solutions. I'm assuming this is, stuff that is kind of I think of SaaS when I hear this. Is that an accurate description, or is that something else?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that the report found was when a team tries to run self-hosted versions of these tools, it quickly reaches the tipping point where the amount of time they spend trying to keep it all running and all working together actually starts to outweigh the benefits.
Yep.
You kind of become a tool infrastructure engineer rather
Yep.
than a developer,
Hey,
as
it's
you try
job
and keep it all.
security. Come on.
Exactly. So yeah, so that's what the problem is. I think there are some cases where you might want something to be on-prem, or there might be some part of the tool chain that you like for some contractual or legal reason you have to have it
Yeah, yeah,
running
that's
in
fair.
your building.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But unless you really have to, it's better to let someone else manage it for you.
Yeah, the one thing that comes out from that for me is cost. I mean, people are moving to self-hosting Kubernetes now because the cost of just using a managed solution is so great. That's anecdotally, of course, but you also mentioned keep workloads clean. I guess you're basically like saying, okay, not too many tools, like 10 plus tools. Yes, you'll be more performant, but use the right tool for the right job is what this says to me. And then
Yeah.
also like try and keep your workloads like, you know, sort of like functional programming, like just keep them small and focused, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. I suppose a good example of this would be say you've got your code in GitHub and you're using GitHub Actions to run your builds. It's possible to plug in loads of other tools to that process that do different kinds of scanning and tasks within that workload. But what if you're not careful, it can get to the point where it's actually really hard to manage that build process because there's so many tools involved, and like you've got a pull request and there's a list of 20 tasks that all need to complete before the pull request is ready to be reviewed, and like you kind of end up with some kind of fragile process because one of those tools could go wrong at any stage and then you have to
Yeah.
repeat the whole process. So it's
Yeah.
kind of you want to try and keep it um, small in each area. So for that continuous integration area, you don't want loads of things all touching your code. You want it to be nice and isolated. And then when the CI is finished, you want to hand that to the next stage, to the
Yes.
next tool, and have that then responsible. So minimal connections between them as well.
And then you say, obviously, dovetailing onto that idea is limit your tool dependencies. So you don't want tools necessarily talking to one another.
Yeah,
Try and yes, interoperability is important. Integrations are important, but the right tool for the right job it should be able to operate independently. I think.
yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of trying to limit it so that they only talk forward one step or they only talk one step back. You don't want like a later tool having to connect up to all six previous tools to try and get different bits of information, because that's where it gets difficult to replace something later, or where you can end up with one tool causing a knock-on problem. So if you can make it like a production line so that each stage just takes the thing from the stage before and then moves it on again, that's ideal.
So if you want to check out the report, it's now available off of the CD Foundation's website, which is cd.foundation. And yes, dot foundation is a TLD. The report itself is well structured, and I love these state of blank reports. So you can go through the data there, but thankfully Steve has done this for you, and you'll find his blog post up on our blog, and it's entitled "Creating a High Performance DevOps Toolchain." Just to summarize, the basic four tenets, I guess, of your blog post are best in class tools. Make sure you use those. Prefer managed solutions if you can. Uh, Budget pending, of course. Keep workloads clean, and then limit tool dependencies. That's a fair, accurate sort of summary, I guess, of the report itself. I guess.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Steve. And I saw this report, and I appreciate the summary, and this is great. And hopefully, folks who download the report, they'll probably go to your blog post and say, "Yeah, this is probably the cliff notes of what I'm looking for."
Brilliant. Thanks, John.
Cheers.